Welcome to the Soualichi Stories series, presented by the Foresee Foundation and funded by the Prince Bernhard Cultuur Fund. The Soualichi Stories series includes our island's most beloved legends, as told by some exceptional Sint Maarten storytellers. The Foresee Foundation is honored to share these stories during the time of social distancing because stories can bring us together. We listen to these stories and we all share in the experience. They bring us close together at a time when distance keeps us all healthy. These stories unite us. They remind us of our heritage, our culture, our one island. Through these legends, we hope you feel more connected to our one island, our culture, and most importantly, to each other. Please enjoy this Soualichi story, as well as all the stories in the series. And let us know if there is a particular story you might like to hear in the future. Enjoy.
My name is Dr. Sock. I've lived on this island, Sint Maarten, for a really long time. Sint Maarten is known for having a rich Caribbean history. Deeply entrenched with the colonial powers, the French, the Dutch, and the Spanish. Sint Maarten was and has always been a unique port in the upward windward region of the Caribbean. When mentioning the uniqueness of Sint Maarten, we can't overlook the fact that Sint Maarten is the smallest territory in the world, let alone an island, divided by two countries, the Dutch and the French. Why the Brits never got a serious foothold on Sint Maarten is another very peculiar story, considering that one of their colonized strongholds, Anguilla, is just visible right next door. That, my friends, is another tale for another day. What I'm about to tell you is a tale that was told to me on my very first visit to Sint Maarten. And I can imagine this tale has been told to just about every newcomer to our island. This is the folklore behind the Treaty of Concordia. Some call it the border story, some call it the Great Divide. But the way this story was told to me, it involved a Frenchman, a Dutchman, and some very unique spirits. This is the legend of the walking people. I want you to think back to the first years Europeans were making port in the Caribbean. The first years of navigating the islands of the Northern Caribbean while trying to make their way to popular ports such as Nassau, Bridgeport, Puerto Rico as it's known today, the Carolinas, or even New Amsterdam. Think back to these days when the trade of slaves and prisoners of war were common and lucrative. These were the days that good old Sint Maarten was commonly known as Swaliga, the land of salt. It was a prominent trading post, and it was held many years by the Spanish. When the Spanish were done with Sint Maarten, they later established a stronghold in Puerto Rico, and they simply left our shores. Much was never said as to why the Spanish suddenly left Swaliga. The French had a unique stronghold at the northern end of the island, which is reinforced by their stronghold in St. Bartholomew. They were intrigued by Sint Maarten. Likewise, the people living in the southern half, now reinforced by the Dutch coming across from St. Eustatius, another neighboring island, they were also intrigued. But no one lingered on that thought too long. The Spanish were gone, and this left Sint Maarten in a peculiar position to be occupied by the French, the Dutch, or perhaps both.
Oh, poor slave. Oh, poor slave.
And so the story goes. A group of French soldiers, led by Commandant Piet, marched along the eastern coast of the island early one morning. The mission was clear for the commandant and his troops. Map and establish routes and landing grounds for easier access from St. Bartholomew to St. Maarten. Un, deux, trois, march! Un, deux, trois, march! The aim was also to find other occupants of the island and drive them out, or possibly establish trade. The French were interested in St. Maarten for different reasons than their other European counterparts in the region. Having been one of the only few colonial powers not to engage in any wars in the region in quite some time, the French were focused on securing and reinforcing their already existing strongholds, both on St. Bartholomew and in Martinique. So this mission eventually landed them in the area that we now know as Oyster Pond. And as the name suggests, this opening was a perfect oyster-shaped cove where perhaps they could establish a maritime shipping post for the French colonies. But so it seems there was just one small problem. Another group, it appears, had already been occupying the area.
Commandant Pierre! Commandant Pierre! I have scouted the oyster-shaped bay, and it is as it seems. This other group of people we spotted are indeed from the south. They are mostly Dutch people, accompanied by a runaway slave, a few escaped prisoners who got away from the Spanish. They are not well armed, but they claim to have a base in the hills overlooking Great Bay. What do you advise, Commandant?
Now remember, the French really had no intention of stirring up any conflict or war with any of their European counterparts. The repercussions could escalate all the way back to Europe. So Commandant Pierre decided to take the approach of peace and see where that would get him. Communication was established between the two groups, and a pleasant gathering was formed. The French took to fishing, bringing a wide assortment of fish and wines to the gathering. And the Dutch, having lived mainly inland, brought meats and fruits and their own brand of spirits, the most famous, which of course is called Geneva, a favorite gin among the Dutch. So as the groups got more comfortable and friendly, conversations were had and more ideas were shared. The leader of the Dutch group was Captain Hans. Captain Hans was a cousin of the famous Dutch Admiral Piet, who later became known as Pegleg Piet. So Hans, after exchanging a few mugs of wine and gin with the Commandant Pierre, came to an accord. An agreement of sorts, based on the sentiment of sharing the island with all the known inhabitants, in peace, or at least so you would think. Now the French are a very proud people, and the Dutch, likewise, don't take kindly on people looking down on them. So this newfound alliance was quickly strained. Who would rule? Where? Under whose laws? If the Spanish ever return or the English become a threat, how will the new allies support each other? Hans and Pierre thought this over very seriously, and finally, after a few nights of deliberation, there was a somewhat sensible suggestion that presented itself. Who made the suggestion? Was it the Dutch? Was it the French? Who knows? But they both agreed. So at the crack of dawn, both parties gathered again at the central location at Oyster Bay, and an arrangement was made. One representative from each camp would stand back to back, and when the sun was fully up and visible on the horizon, both representatives would head out along the shoreline in opposite directions until they met on the other side of the island. Based on this relative measuring technique, they would split the island in two halves, and each half would be held, managed, and protected by their relative European heads, the French and the Dutch. All parties were in agreement at the crack of dawn. One Frenchman set out along the northern shoreline, and one Dutchman set out along the southern shoreline. Now remember, the French delegation was mostly soldiers. So their representative set off with a rigid dedication to the task in hand. All he took with him was some dried eel, a bit of wine, and a flask of water. Un, deux, trois, march! Un, deux, trois, march! And following in suit, the Dutch representative set out with the same aim to accomplish the task at hand, taking with him a few fruits, some dried meat, and his lucky Geneva. Un, deux, trois, march! Un, deux, trois, march! Now, exactly what transpired is anyone's guess. But the Frenchman and the Dutchman met up again, eventually in the area we now know as the Lowlands. From that point to Oyster Pond now marks the border that divides French and Dutch St. Maarten. Some will tell you the Frenchman was too lazy, or maybe too smart to walk around the northern mountain range, so he made his way through French cul-de-sac, which brought him plenty of time, and that's why the French northern half of the island is somewhat bigger. Others will tell you the Dutchman was so captivated with the amazing beauty of the southern beaches that he took a dip here or there along the way. Or that he was so captivated by his bottle of Geneva, his gin, that he eventually took a nap, which cost him a lot of time, giving the Frenchman more time to walk further around the island, which is why the Dutch southern half of the island is a bit smaller. In either case, as the story goes, having met back with the Frenchman, the agreement was honored. And ever since, the French would keep the northern area, which occupied the coast facing Anguilla, and the Dutch would have the area of the fort and the land around it on the south coast. The inhabitants would share the natural resources of the island. So it goes. France and the Netherlands continued to dispute the ownership of the island until 1817, when the borders were finally set. To be quite honest, I like the legend of the walking people much better.
When I look around me,
one island, one people, one destiny.
we gotta come together.
We hope you enjoyed this inspiring Sint Maarten legend, Soualichi Stories, as presented by the Foresee Foundation and funded by the Prince Bernhard Culture Fund, in the hopes that these stories help all of you feel a bit more connected to this island and to each other. More information on the stories and schedule can be found on Foresee Foundation's Facebook page or website. We look forward to connecting with you again soon for our next Soualichi story.